coming out of Washington, which is only going to make inflation worse, which is going to destroy more jobs in our country, and will only actually empower Democrats here on Capitol Hill while the rest of our country has to suffer. They've been messing around in backroom negotiations and smoke-filled rooms, and only what's been coming out are these frameworks that have been passed along by the President of the United States. What we've been been able to glean so far, because again, there still isn't text, they're still playing with the language, is that we're looking at about $800 billion in tax increases through budget reconciliation. Now, keep this in mind. These tax increases go for a decade, while the spending programs might last for 2 years or 1 year or 3 years. So Democrats want to tax the American people massively over the next decade, but then they want to create these short-term programs because what they really want to do is have these programs get embedded in our society. And if you embed all these programs into our society over a decade, the real cost can be in upwards of $5 trillion or more. So I want to stop right there because we have many members in the Republican conference who want to communicate directly to the American people and explain to them how reckless of a package this is. This is why the majority party is still struggling to find votes. And it's important that the American people contact their members of Congress and their members of the United States Senate and ask them to please stop this reckless agenda being pushed forward by Joe Biden, by Bernie Sanders, and by Nancy Pelosi. And with that, I'm going to yield to the Minority Whip, Mr. Scalise.
Well, thank you, Byron. I really appreciate your leadership on this. And on behalf of all the RSC, I know our chairman, Jim Banks, is going to be here as well. And one of the things that we've been hearing all across the country from our constituents, from people all around the nation, is they're fed up with the failed policies of President Biden and Speaker Pelosi. And especially they're angry about the inflation that all the trillions of dollars that have already been spent are causing and taking money out of the pockets of those families. President Biden, when he ran, he promised, if you make less than $400,000, you won't pay a dime in new taxes. The problem is, with the Biden inflation tax, that is already hitting hardworking families. In fact, lower-income families are hit the hardest by inflation. And what kind of inflation? I'm talking about the more than 40% that people are paying for higher gas costs. When they go to the grocery store, everything they're buying is more expensive. In fact, the reports are that this will be the most expensive Thanksgiving in history because of President Biden's inflation. And what is his answer? Instead of working with House Republicans, we want to focus on lowering gas prices with a robust energy strategy. We want to focus on lowering the prices that people pay for things at the grocery store by getting our economy back open again. And instead, they want to spend trillions more and then raise taxes even higher, including things like the natural gas tax, which low-income families will pay the hardest. Again, breaking his promise of people less than $400,000 a year. Those families will pay a lot more in higher taxes. Estimates are up to 20% more in their electricity bills. And why do they want to raise these taxes? It's not to balance the federal budget. It's not to solve these crises that he's created. It's to create more programs like adding 87,000 more IRS agents. That's more than doubling the size of the IRS to then go snoop on people's bank accounts. And it's not the millionaires and the billionaires they plan on snooping. They plan to raise another $400 billion by sending this new army of IRS agents to snoop on bank accounts of people like the waitstaff at a restaurant who are struggling already. The IRS is going to be snooping on their bank accounts. They want to create millions more loopholes for illegal aliens to come to this country at a time when President Biden is now contemplating giving $450,000 a year taxpayer money to each illegal alien who's filed suit against the United States, giving them $450,000 per person, and then creating amnesty in this bill to bring millions more people in. That's more money than a Gold Star family gets. That's more money than a victim of 9/11 got. That's the obscene madness of trillions in spending that people are revolting against all across the country, including in Virginia. You're seeing it all across this nation. People want government to get out of their lives, want government to spend less money, not to see Joe Biden continue spending trillions more with higher taxes and more radical big government socialism. With that, turn it back over to Byron.
Thank you so much. Right now, we're going to go to Representative Kevin Hern of the great state of Oklahoma. Kevin.
Thank you, Byron, for holding this press conference. You know, I've spent 35 years in business, and so I know what it's like to be on the other side of the crazy tax increases that we're seeing that's put forth in this bill. And let's just think about what this Build Back Broke bill will be. It's going to, in one vote that we have, it's going to force a Green New Deal economy. It's going to shut down small businesses due to taxation and depleted workforce, cripple future generations with increasingly ridiculous amounts of debt, a socialist takeover of our schools, our checking accounts, our health care, our child care, and a one-size-fits-all cradle-to-grave welfare plan. Progressives want all or nothing. They are holding infrastructure hostage, something that passed in a bipartisan way in the Senate nearly 60, 70 days ago, that we could get in the House and pass and put people to work. The unions across America are pushing on the Democrats to put the infrastructure bill on the floor to get it passed. Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema have made their position clear, but Pelosi and Biden pretend they still have a path forward. We see them huddling up on the floor. There is no path. They were supposed to vote on it yesterday. For the fourth time, Speaker Pelosi has promised the American people she would put it on the floor to be voted on. And time again now she has not. She has failed. You know, I just want to remind everybody, I've experienced the American dream. I've come from a place where lived on welfare, and a dad that understood, a stepdad understood he'd run into the mailbox was the most important thing about getting a welfare check. So I'm living proof that the American dream works. A person who can come from absolutely nothing to experience the great successes of his country. But the Democrats' dream, the new American dream as it's portrayed by the Democrats, is a self-reliance on big government for the rest of their lives. Friends, this is ridiculous. This is why we got to continue to push back on this. And the Republicans you see standing behind me, as well as those in our entire conference, are doing that. Thank you, Byron, and I yield back to you, sir. Thank you.
Next up, we have the ranking member for the Budget Committee, Representative Jason Smith.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Whip Scalise. It's an honor to be here. Whenever you try to sum up this legislation, it's based on this reckless spending spree. They prioritize Wall Street over Main Street. They definitely care more about the prices of the stock market than they do of the supermarket. And that is what we've been saying all along. They try to say it's a $1.75 trillion spending bill. And we said all along that they would use budget gimmicks and a shell game approach to try to bring down that number by retaining the majority of the policies that was in their original $4.3 trillion bill. This bill, in fact, according to the House Budget Committee, it scores at $4.6 trillion over a 10-year period. However, this is a budget, and Nancy Pelosi's always said a budget is a statement of your values. You want to know what the Democrats' values is? Look at this piece of legislation. They always talk about the children. Speaker Pelosi says it's all about the children. It's all about the families. Well, let's look at this bill. They changed the child tax credit from the original bill of expiring in the year 2025, and they moved it to the year 2022. It's only 1 year. But you know what they made permanent in this piece of legislation? Everything that rewards their wealthiest environmentalist friends. Almost $500 billion in permanent policies to implement the Green New Deal and to promote and help their wealthy environmentalists. Folks, this bill is all about bankrupting the economy. It benefits the wealthy, and it builds the Washington bureaucracy. When you talk about benefiting the wealthy, what's holding this bill up right now more than anything is the moderate members trying to get the SALT deduction included, the state and local tax deduction. Why are they doing this? Is because they want to give a $35,000 tax break to the one percenters. A $35,000 tax break to the one percenters. This bill that they're trying to push forward will give tax breaks to the one percenters and will give tax increases to families who make less than $50,000 a year. And when you talk about building back the Washington bureaucracy, this bill alone creates over 150 new federal programs. 150 new federal programs. The words fees, taxes, fines is listed more than 700 times in this reckless spending spree. And all of it is at the expense of the working class to benefit their political friends, allies, and donors.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ranking Member Smith. Next up, we have Congressman French Hill.
Thank you, Byron. Thanks for proposing that we do this press conference and show the American people what's in this bill. I appreciate the Republican Study Committee, the leadership of Jim Banks, our chairman, and certainly the work of our whip for providing that information to the American people, because it's not about the dollar amount, it's about what's in this bill. And I'm here today because, and I think the Republicans are all here today, because unlike Democrats following Speaker Pelosi's mantra for 10 years, which is we have to pass the bill so that we can see what's in it, we and our staffs are reading the bill. We know what's in it, and that's why we're here sharing our concerns with the American people. After spending $1.9 trillion in March, money of which is still not in the economy, Democrats are doubling down with their Build Back Better, or has been said now, Build Back the Bureaucracy, or Build Back Broke. All these are good descriptors of what's being proposed for this Trojan horse. Democrats need to abandon this reckless spending plan because it's only going to fuel inflation, only going to compound the problem that our seniors and our working families are having making ends meet. That 5% increase in Social Security that was reported a few weeks ago is eaten up completely by the Biden inflation, and this bill will only add to those woes. What do we want to do as Republicans? You're going to hear what's wrong with this bill. Let's talk about what we're going to do when we take back the House in 2022. We want to go back to the pre-pandemic prosperity of this nation. We want to free American business from these job-killing mandates, not burdening them with new regulatory burdens and new tax hikes, which is what this Democratic plan does. We want to encourage capital formation, not by taxing investment to death, which is what this plan does, not by imposing new taxes on retirement savings, which this bill does. We want to repatriate capital back to the U.S., jobs back to the U.S., not going in the direction that the Democrats' bill does, which will cost 6 million jobs due to their corporate tax policies. Finally, it's time to rein in our discretionary spending. I'll remind everyone that between 2011, when the Republicans took back the House, and 2019, in a pre-pandemic period, discretionary spending was flat. It declined in real terms over that decade because of budget planning, the spending caps. That's what's important. We want to go back to pre-pandemic growth in our economy, jobs and opportunity. We want to go back to pre-pandemic working towards balanced budgets and targeted spending. I thank my friend. I yield back to him.
Next, we're going to have Congressman Joyce. Congressman.
Thank you, Byron, for holding this, and thanks to Whip Scalise for being here. This pending legislation is simply not what the American people need, and it's certainly not what they want. The socialist spending spree package would only exacerbate our energy crisis and make our country, unfortunately, less safe. So far, the Biden administration has placed a moratorium on new American drilling. Biden has canceled the Keystone XL pipeline and allowed Russians to produce oil for our allies in Europe. This legislation doubles down on the Biden administration's war, their war on American energy. This legislation overregulates and overtaxes the coal, the oil, and the Marcellus Shale industries that provide family-sustaining jobs to my constituents in Pennsylvania and low-cost power to all of Americans. Instead of supporting American energy, this bill hands out green energy tax credits to wind and solar manufacturers that are simply unable to meet our country's needs. Wind turbines and solar panels are not going to heat our homes this winter. We need to focus on regaining America's energy independence. We need to focus on lowering energy costs before winter. This inflation, unfortunately, is not transitory. We can't wish away this problem. Passing the Green New Deal dressed up as an infrastructure legislation is not the answer to the problems that we face right now in America. We need to find fiscal responsible ways to build roads and to repair bridges. We need to complete projects like the Appalachian Regional Highway System. And we need to do all of this without mortgaging our children's future. We need to do this without ballooning our deficit and burdening the American people for decades to come. Thank you, and I yield.
Next up, we have Congressman Murphy from the great state of North Carolina. Not greater than Florida, but close.
Go Tar Heels. Go Tar Heels. I want to thank Representative Donalds for putting this all together. Ladies and gentlemen, the Build Back Bankrupt, I'll throw another one in there, spending scheme will immeasurably and irreparably harm the great future of this country. When you take time to read the fine print of the 1,684-page bill, still in progress, the results are simply devastating, particularly for our national security and the worst self-inflicted border crisis in this nation's history. The Democrats want to wave a magic wand and immediately grant amnesty to 10 million illegal immigrants. Think about that. 10 million folks that came into this country illegally. Giving 10 million people who knowingly and willfully broke our laws automatic citizenship will send a signal to the world, not only that our borders are open for illegal activity, but the Biden administration is encouraging people to break this nation's laws. On top of that, the Build Back Bankrupt scheme hands over $100 billion of earned American citizen taxpayer money to illegal immigrants in the form of new federal benefits. We have so many problems with poverty in this nation with our own citizens, and now we're giving federal benefits to those who came in this country illegally. Yet another invitation to break the laws of this country and come inside. At the same time, their plan, gives zero funding for border construction or border patrol. They both the Democrats literally want to destroy the foundation of this nation. Keep in mind that this is all happening while we're getting reports that the administration is considering giving illegal immigrants $500,000. $500,000 in checks and compensation. That is a slap in the face to those who have died in service to this country. It is a slap in the face of those who died in 9/11. Just a few days ago, I led a letter with 45 members of my GOP colleagues calling out this absolutely absurd and anti-American policy and urging the administration to reject any financial awards that individuals coming into this country who came in here illegally would get. Make no mistake, this administration cares more about illegal immigrants than it does of their own citizens. And how do we know that? A recent poll has now shown that 71% of Americans, the Americans who have now woken up, now disagree with the administration's direction they are taking this country. 71% now say the administration is taking us the wrong way. We talk about woke America. Well, the real America is now waking up. Thank you, and I'll yield back.
I think we're going to stay with this North Carolina theme. Right now we have with us Congressman Bishop, also from the great state of North Carolina.
Thank you, Congressman Donalds. We've actually got a majority here because we got to see another fellow North Carolinian to my left as well. You can't build anything with a wrecking ball, and that's what this bill will do. Take a wrecking ball to what is left of our economy. And we've had a foretaste. The so-called American Rescue Plan, the big socialist spending plan, $1.9 trillion, pure partisanship earlier this year. How are the results working out? Is it working out for the American people? Highest inflation in 30 years. They see it at the gas pump. We see it in the store when you buy your groceries.
job estimates constantly missing, a malaise, much as you might remember from the Carter administration, just not hitting on all cylinders. And so with that state of our economy currently, they would take a wrecking ball to it and propose to build with a wrecking ball. Spin us into oblivion with a far-left wish list. Nuke our economy with green energy proposals. Amnesty for illegal immigrants, as has been said. And of course, don't forget tree equity. The American taxpayer won't just be footing the bill. They'll have to bear the IRS monitoring their bank accounts all across our economy. If the cost of the Biden agenda is truly nothing, as they claim, then why send the IRS after everyday Americans? Because this bill is the farthest thing from fully paid for. It will be something that our country will pay for generations, and they know it. Look, Democrats should respect the American people enough to tell them the truth. They will not. And therefore, I would urge Americans to call their representatives and tell them to reject this plan outright. I yield back.
Thank you, Dan. Next up, we have Mr. Blake Moore from the state of Utah. Blake.
Thank you, Rep. Donaldson. Hey, I'm going to start. I'm going to start the way I'm going to finish. This tax and spend bill is unpopular. 71% of Americans have made it very clear that they think our country is going in the wrong direction. The Democrat Party needs to reconcile with that, lack of a better term, and realize the American people is telling you something. This is not popular. I'm going to summarize 2 anecdotes. Whenever you get a 1,500-page bill that we have no time to actually evaluate, you ought to just simplify things. I hosted my Chambers of Commerce last week in Washington, and one of them pulled me aside and said, is anybody surprised, actually, back here at the inflation? When you spend this much, like we had seen from a previous bill that wasn't really related to COVID, was just massive spending. When you spend that much and have that difficult a time getting workforce with low workforce and labor numbers, we are going to experience inflation. That is a direct tax on everybody that makes less than $400,000 a year. Those are the simple facts. I'm sitting in a committee meeting on natural resources. My wife, who does not get involved in a lot of this stuff, and I think she's just happier because of it, she sends me a text message with a picture of the gas pump on it. It was at $100, something that she hadn't seen forever. And she says, what are you all doing back there? She doesn't get involved. She's not that involved in the minutia of these policy debates. This is hitting everyday Americans. And they're telling you this is bad. This is unpopular. Leadership is simple. You look at objectively what works, what we were seeing pre-COVID in our economy, and you recognize that works, empowering industry, creating jobs. Right now we have 0% growth in the last month. This is simple. Americans get it, and the Democrat Party needs to recognize this is bad policy. We saw one reconciliation package go through back in January, February. There is no COVID to hide behind with this upcoming reconciliation package, and this is clear that it is unpopular. Thanks.
Next, from the state of Pennsylvania, we have Congressman Fred Keller.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Donalds, and I thank all my colleagues for being here today. And we're here really pointing out the obvious, and it's obvious to everybody except for President Biden, Speaker Pelosi, and Leader Schumer. And the one thing we know is that Build Back Better doesn't get done from Washington, D.C. It gets done from the American people, American small businesses, because they understand what it is to have to get up every day and go to work, support their family, run their business, and earn a living. When we talk about what they want to do with their scheme here, their socialist agenda, it's they want control. And whoever controls more of your money And how you earn it controls more of your actions. They're doing that with their crisis they've created with inflation, taxes, and energy. President Biden mentioned that he was becoming frustrated with Americans because they weren't getting vaccinated. He should get half as frustrated with Russia, China, and the Taliban, and not the American people, because he didn't build this. And the only people that think this costs zero are the ones that have been in Washington, D.C. far too long, and that's Speaker Pelosi and President Biden. We need to say no to this because the American people are a lot more thoughtful than they give them credit for. We all know that. That's why we're standing here and we're fighting every day to make sure that your rights are returned to you and the government stops this broad overreach of socialist policies. This Build Back Better is nothing more than a scheme to try and gain control over the lives of the American people. And as long as we're here, we're going to make sure we fight for what America stands for, and that's the people we work for and represent. I thank Representative Donalds and all my colleagues, and I yield back.
Going back to the state of North Carolina, we have Congressman Ted Budd.
Thank Congressman Donalds for having us here today. So less than 1 year into the Biden presidency, America is stumbling from one crisis to another. Bottom line, Joe Biden has caused these crises, and his radical agenda is just going to make it worse. So in the middle of a border crisis, President Biden wants to pay illegal immigrants $450,000 and then grant them amnesty. In the middle of an energy crisis, President Biden wants to pass the socialist Green New Deal, which will cause electric and gas prices to skyrocket even further. In the middle of an inflation crisis, President Biden wants to push prices even higher by pumping trillions more into the economy in federal dollars. And when our federal citizens question his failed record, the Biden White House tells us to, quote, lower our expectations, like it's somehow the people's fault. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the American people haven't failed Joe Biden. Joe Biden has failed the American people. The best way that we can defeat the crises now facing our country is to defeat Joe Biden's radical agenda. And that's how we get our country on the right track. I yield back to Congressman Donalds, and again, thank him for having this time together today.
From the state of Wisconsin, Congressman Scott Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Congressman Donalds. I know some of this stuff is pretty abstract, so I just wanted to bring it back to my state. And the tax and spend legislation is just the tip of the iceberg in Wisconsin right now. I have literally the Michaels Corporation, which is in Brownsville, Wisconsin, employs a lot of people in my district, Precision Pipeline in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. They were awarded contracts with the Keystone Pipeline, and it could have created 2,000 jobs. But all those jobs have been destroyed on one day back in January when the Biden presidency canceled this critical infrastructure project just hours after being sworn in. So not only did the president rob people in Wisconsin of good-paying jobs, but he also imposed skyrocketing gas and energy, as many of my colleagues have been discussing here today. This reconciliation package will double down on Biden's energy policy failures and codify the administration's mistakes into law right as the holiday and winter season is upon us. It's a bad idea, as you've heard, and I yield back.
From the state of South Dakota, Mr. Dusty Johnson. Congressman Dusty Johnson.
So the New York Times describes this package as a transformational reweaving of the cradle-to-grave safety net. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is a reweaving that, make no bones about it, it undermines, it undercuts, it undervalues work. Now, if you're like me and my colleagues, you know that work is opportunity. Work is not punishment. Unfortunately, experts predict that these policies will force 2 million, that is 2 million more Americans to exit the workforce. It provides larger subsidies to people who quit their jobs, healthcare subsidies. It turns the child tax credit from a program that helps working families into just another welfare program. We all know that we need a social safety net in this country, but it should be a safety net, ladies and gentlemen, that encourages work, that rewards work, that supports work. When these anti-work handouts are added to the array of welfare programs that already exist, helping people with heating and with housing, with health care, with daycare, with nutrition, with other household expenses, we should not be surprised when 2 million more Americans trade a day in the factory for a day on the couch. America will be poorer, and America will be less competitive because of these policies if they are enacted. Ladies and gentlemen, we must do better. Thank you.
Coming up next, we have from the great state of Tennessee, Congressman John Rose.
Thank you, Byron, and thank you for putting this together today. Like many listening, no doubt, as a young high school student, I was assigned the task of reading George Orwell's seminal book, 1984, that tells the story of a dystopian future where a person called Big Brother rules with impunity. I think it's safe to say that as we look at the Democratic Party's current proposal in the form of this socialist agenda, we see that the face of Big Brother might well be the modern Democratic Party. Buried within the Democrats' socialist tax and spend package is an intrusive proposal that would allow the Internal Revenue Service to spy on bank accounts of nearly every hardworking American. This misguided proposal would create an IRS surveillance program that would require all financial institutions to monitor, track, and report accounts that have more than $10,000 worth of inflow or outflow in a given year. The Democrats plan to give the IRS unfettered access to the personal and private finances of American citizens. It's a gross abuse of power and should be deeply concerning to anyone who values privacy and even economic inclusion. Since the power by the federal government to gather such large swaths of information on regular American citizens will cause many to close their bank accounts, which will deny them the full access to participation in our economic system. The Biden administration claims to have scaled back their original proposal by moving the threshold that triggers the spying from 600 to 10,000. However, this still targets the majority of Americans who only need 10,000 in cumulative inflows or outflows to subject themselves to this surveillance. This is nothing short of widespread, indiscriminate government spying that lays bare a direct threat to the American way of life. And when you consider the IRS experiences 1.4 billion cyber attacks per year, as well as the agency's past reputation for handling such attacks, there's little reason to believe the IRS's capability to protect this unprecedented access to our personal financial information from cyber criminals or even from the politically motivated rogue IRS employees would come to pass. Month after month, we have seen the Biden administration go from small steps toward socialism to big strides toward socialism. We now can see the face of Big Brother, and it is the Democratic Party. As the concept of a surveillance state becomes more of a reality, I am proud to stand alongside Representative Donalds and my fellow members of the Congress to oppose Democrats' far-left socialist policies. Thank you, Byron.
I didn't tell him he was going next, but from the great state of Texas, and I know they're always ready, we have Congressman Brian Babin. Brian, you ready?
Thank you, Byron. Appreciate that. I just want to say thank you to my friend and colleague from Florida, Byron Donalds, for having this press conference and having this initiative that we're talking about today. Democrats call their bill the Build Back Better Act, but in reality, it's the Build Back Broke Act. And it destroys every single thing that makes America great and that we hold dear. Stealing from the layman to line the pockets of special interest groups and the liberal elite while entrenching a radical agenda into law. This is mind-blowing stuff, an outrage from people who should know better and do know better. My Democrat colleagues would have been successful in desensitizing the American people to the word trillion. They have been successful. We keep hearing a trillion over and over again, but please allow me to put this into context. A trillion seconds equals 31,710 years. 31,710 years is a trillion. That's incomprehensible to the average human mind. Knowing this, how can we ever accept a $1.75 trillion, 1,500-page bill without even having a chance to read the thing? It's incredible. Not only do we not know what's in it, but the American people also do not know what's in it. This bill attacks the oil and gas industry. It furthers the left's pro-abortion agenda. It penalizes businesses who stand up for medical freedom. And perhaps worst of all, it grants amnesty to some 10 million illegal aliens, signaling to the criminal cartels that we are a weak and a borderless nation. How can the Democrats claim this bill will build back better when it funds the murder of innocent children, erodes our individual rights, and it mocks the thousands of immigrants that are legally waiting in line? How can they believe that destroying our energy independence and saddling our own grandchildren with trillions of dollars of debt will benefit anyone? The answer, folks, is that they don't. This bill was written by politicians of the Democratic Party for the benefit of the politicians of the Democratic Party only. And it is a total sellout of hard-working Americans and their freedom and the fruits of their labors. And I want to say thanks again to my friend and colleague, Mr. Donald, for having this. Thank you, Byron. Yes, sir.
Coming up next, we have from the great state of Tennessee, Congressman Tim Burchett. Tim?
Thank you, Byron. Sorry. Thank you, Byron. You know, Biden, Pelosi, and the Democrats say everything is infrastructure. If that's true, we should shut down all these committees we have, except for transportation and infrastructure, and run everything out of there. This is a bogus way for Democrats to govern, and they know it. We need bills that are focused on individual issues, not a radical political agenda. When I was in the state legislature, my mentor, Ben Ashley, said, I know what you're against, but what are you for? So I'm going to tell y'all what I'm for, what we could do to fix some of this. We have a way of dealing with big government power grabs like this in the Tennessee state legislature. We caption the bill. So if the bill deals with dog catchers, dadgummit, the final bill will deal with dog catchers. When I say that everyone tells me, Burchett, we do this, you know what? We'll be here all night if we voted for everything individually. Well, you know what? Dadgummit, that's what we should be doing, working here all night. We make more in 1 year than most Tennesseans won't make in 4 or 5 years. It's ridiculous. Our constituents know what goes on up here. Bills that are thousands of pages long are written in secret, then scheduled for a vote just hours after it becomes public. How can anybody expect their elected officials to understand everything that's in a bill if we do something like that when that happens? My friend, who's former Speaker of the House, Jimmy Nafee, used to say, if you don't want to work, you shouldn't have hired on. Well, folks, the Democrats want to blindly support massive bills like this. They shouldn't be working up here. We have absolutely no idea how much the Democrats' agenda will increase America's taxes or how much it will grow the national deficit. Supporting legislation before we know this information is fiscally reckless and erodes what little trust Americans still have in Congress. Thank you, Byron. I appreciate you. You're an excellent organizer and a fairly decent football player. So thank you, sir.
We're going to have to see after tomorrow night. We'll figure that out. Staying in the great state of Tennessee, we have Congresswoman Diana Harshberger.
Thank you, Byron. Byron is a fantastic colleague, and he is a wonderful classmate, and he is younger than my son, just FYI. I'd like to echo the concerns of my fellow colleagues on the big government socialist spending bill. This bill is the wrong prescription for America's economic woes. There are many troubling provisions in this bill, as my colleagues have mentioned, and I want to highlight a provision that I know folks back home in East Tennessee are concerned about. This bill fails to include life-saving Hyde Amendment protections. The Hyde Amendment has saved 2.5 million lives since 1976. Removing it is unconscionable. The truth is taxpayers should never be forced to pay for abortions. We must always protect the lives of the unborn. We're their only hope. If that's not enough, the Biden administration has outrageously claimed this bill costs zero, nada, zilch, nothing. And if you believe that, I've got some oceanfront property in East Tennessee that you can buy. And we're landlocked, by the way. You know, if this is what they call building back better, then you can count me out. What I'd rather do is bust Biden's bubble by not voting for this. Yeah, keep that. But, you know, I was told when I was running for this position that Congress, we are the 1% that has to explain everything to the other 99%, and those are the people that we serve. And there is nothing transparent about this bill. They make it so complicated, even we can't understand it a lot of times. So, you know, we're just up here defending what's right for our country. And with that, Byron, I yield back.
Thank you, Diana. From the state of New York, Congresswoman Claudia Tenney.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here with our great new colleague, freshman. I'm a born-again freshman, Byron Donalds. Get to be in this position again. But, you know, I could highlight all the terrible things in the bill that many of my colleagues have, whether it's the IRS spying, whether it's the money being put in the IRS, the Green New Deal, raising prescription drug costs. But I've seen this documentary before, and it's called New York State. We have a perfect incubator to show why it doesn't work. I served in the New York State Assembly under one-party rule in the State Assembly. We had 3 men in a room. We did at the time have a Senate Republican that was in the room, but now we have no Republicans that are in the room negotiating this. This president and this Congress ran on being bipartisan. Where are the Republicans in the room while we're negotiating this? And let's just take a look at what happened in New York State. Huge spending. And although my colleague said bust Biden's bubble, I think this is Build Back Beijing. As someone from upstate New York, where the Industrial Revolution was founded, the first shovel in the ground for the Erie Canal, which started New York on its path to being the Empire State, we now have the highest outmigration of people, among the highest taxes. We have the least friendly business state, and we have the highest number of amount of money in terms of what they call corporatism or corporate welfare spent in order to create jobs. And guess how many jobs are created? We have a net loss in jobs in New York State, and it's because of our small businesses that are keeping us alive. This bill will hurt small businesses. It will create a massive federal government, which will be controlled by bureaucrats and partisans in the executive branch here in Washington, not the people in our district, not even the people in New York. And that's what we do in New York, and that's what we're mirroring with this bill. It doesn't work, and New York State is a perfect example of that. And I just urge my colleagues to vote against it. Let's have some bipartisanship in this country for once. Have the Republicans in the room negotiating. Stop targeting and vilifying people who have differing views. Let's get together. Let's have us able to talk about it and talk about the provisions that we think are that need to be added. And I think you'll get a bill that will be much more acceptable and much more agreeable to the American people. Will promote business expansion and help our constituents, especially from the rural and suburban areas that I represent and across this country. And with that, I yield back and thank again our great congressman from Florida, Mr. Byron Donalds. Thank you.
All right, next, one of my colleagues from the great state of Florida, Congresswoman Kat Cammack.
Well, good afternoon. And Representative Donalds, I am shocked that you weren't able to throw in a quip on introduction. You'll find that my good friend from South Florida and I, we enjoy ribbing each other on a regular basis. But today, it is such almost a tragic day in America when we are faced with a piece of legislation that truly transforms the foundation of our country. You will hear example after example, egregious provisions built into this bill, much of which has yet to be discovered because we haven't been able to really read it in its entirety yet, let alone the accompanying budget documents that outline exactly what this is going to cost, not just us, but our kids and our grandkids. And we know full well that the spending that is taking place currently, we are garnishing the wages of our children and our grandchildren. And as a token millennial in Congress, much of the spending and decisions of today fall on my shoulders, my generation, and the Gen Zs that are coming shortly thereafter. But you'll hear and have heard so many of these things. The thing I want to talk about is a little bit more 30,000 foot about this bill. You can call it the Biden Build Back Better plan. You can call it the reconciliation bill. You can call it Bernie's budget. It is truly his life's work. But what I know is that this is a bust back home. This is Bernie's budget bust back home. This is a Build Back Broke plan that places equal outcome over equal opportunity. And that's a real shame because our entire country is built on the notion of equal opportunity, not equal outcome. And every stitch of this bill works us further and deeper towards a system that is unfair, unjust, and targets people based on the boxes that they check rather than what they can bring to the table. That is truly tragic when we are talking about a bill that no one has read, that no one will have a serious debate about, because at the end of the day, for this administration, for Speaker Pelosi and her cronies, it's about checking the box. You'll hear about how illegals are prioritized over citizens or immigrants who have come here the right way. You'll hear about the provisions that put the very industries that built this country underground. But at the end of the day, what you won't hear is how this bill will set us back not 5, 10, 15, 20 years. This will set us back centuries, because we will be broken from the egregious spending and provisions that are built in that will fundamentally transform our country for the worse. And I think it's high time that we get serious about screaming from the rooftops, demanding that voices across the spectrum be heard, but most importantly, everyday Americans need to be heard because they are the ones that will be hurt most under this bill. So thank you to my colleague and good friend Byron Donalds from the Freedom State, Florida, for hosting today's press conference. And thank you to all my colleagues who have been standing and fighting alongside to make sure that this bill never sees the light of day. And with that, I yield back.
Kat, no quips today. It's business today. We'll do that later. From the great state of Georgia, Congressman Andrew Clyde.
Thank you, Byron. I appreciate that very much. Byron's office is right beside mine there up on the 5th floor of Cannon, so we get to see each other a fair bit. So thank you to you and the Republican Study Committee for continuing to shine a spotlight on the Democrats' big government socialist spending bill. You know, despite Democrats scaling back their tax and spend spree from a face value of what was $4.3 trillion to now $1.75 trillion, their reckless reconciliation bill is still saturated with radical policies that will forever alter the course of this great nation. Taxpayer-funded abortion, mass amnesty for illegal immigrants, tax hikes for small businesses, and the list goes on and on. But one of the most alarming provisions in the Build Back Better Act, which should more truthfully be called the Biden-Bernie Bankruptcy Act, one of the most alarming provisions doubles the size of the Internal Revenue Service. Drunk on power, Democrats are attempting to funnel $80 billion to the IRS to hire 87,000 new agents. By supercharging the IRS, Democrats are weaponizing the agency against low and middle income workers. It's been weaponized enough, thank you. It's going to hurt families and small businesses too. If you don't believe me, take a look at the pay-fors needed to fund their far-left agenda. Democrats anticipate the largest offset for their pricey package to come from the IRS raking in $400 billion through closing the tax gap, whatever that is. But their fuzzy math doesn't quite add up. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office and the bipartisan Joint Committee on Taxation estimate that the IRS will only deliver half that amount, meaning the IRS will be combing through American citizens' financials their information to make up for this $200 billion shortfall. Targeting Americans in hopes of bringing in billions to pay for an irresponsible liberal wish list is just wrong. It's that plain and simple. And trust me, I know. Back in 2013, the IRS targeted me and wrongfully confiscated $940,000 from my firearms business. I fought back and won, but it cost me $150,000 to defend my honor and my business. You know, it's all about the money. The IRS targeting can happen to any American worker and any business. We must protect Americans and our financial system, not make them the victim of government overreach in the name of raising revenue. So thank you, Byron. I appreciate you spotlighting this issue today. And I yield.
And we have with us from the great state of Texas, Congressman Pat Fallon.
Thanks, sir. I want to thank my colleagues and Congressman Donalds for calling this press conference. The Build Back Better reconciliation package has a lot of awful provisions in it, one of which I don't really even want to talk about, but I feel compelled to touch upon. Hiring 85 or 87,000 IRS agents and giving $80 billion to that agency. Who in the right mind is going to want that? And also to say that we can, as a federal government, pry into your bank accounts if you spend as little as $28 a day. This is Orwellian. And is it 2021 or is it 1984? And one of the other provisions I do want to talk about a little bit today with you is Section 0005 of the reconciliation package. And it says in that, quote, they're going to set aside $2.8 billion to increase the capacity of the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services to adjudicate efficiently amnesty applications and reduce case processing backlogs. That is liberal speak for giving amnesty to up to 8 million people. There is a crisis at the border. In fact, it's a catastrophe at the border right now. I represent Texas. It's a border state. But Joe Biden has made every state a border state. 1.7 million people have crossed the border illegally in one fiscal year. That's the entire state of West Virginia. That's more than 11 states have in their population. And it's overwhelming the system. We're allowing other nation states to export their poverty. And what's patently unfair about that is 3.8 million people across this planet are waiting to come to this country legally, respecting the laws and the rules of the country that they want to become a part of. And to make it a racial argument, which somebody on the left do, 95% of those 3.8 million people are people of color. They never mention that. And we're rooting for them because they're doing it the right way. And when they get here on net, they're going to be an immediate value add to this nation. And I thought that's what we were supposed to do. And it was incumbent upon us is to do the things that are in the best interest of our nation state. And all this bill is doing is going to act like a magnet to attract even more folks to come. And the Mexican drug cartels are benefiting wildly. We've seized 10,469 pounds of fentanyl. That's enough to kill every American 7 times over, just this year alone. And the drug cartels have the GDP of a nation state. We have, literally, they think it's somewhere between, experts will tell you, on the low end, $15 billion, on the high end, $50 billion is what the Mexican drug cartels collectively take in annually. We have nation states in NATO that have the similar GDPs. Estonia is $32 billion. Latvia is $33 billion. Lithuania is $56 billion, those small countries. So we are allowing a nation-state-sized criminal enterprise to control our southern border because Joe Biden has abdicated his responsibility to protect Americans because Byron knows this. Our greatest calling is to keep Americans safe because if you're not safe, then you're not free. I fiercely oppose this awful legislation that's going to set, as Kat Kamick said, set us back not years or decades, but possibly centuries. Byron, thank you so much for calling this press conference, and thank you for attending.
Well, listen, in closing, I want to thank everybody for coming. What you've heard today is an actual breakout of what's in Joe Biden's reckless plan, the thing that Bernie Sanders has been wanting his entire political career. And the funny thing that I will tell you is you will actually never hear the Democrats actually talk about the provisions of their bills. It was said earlier that all Nancy Pelosi ever talks about are the children. It's the only thing that AOC ever talks about is the environment. But they never talk about what's actually in the proposals or in the text. And the American people had an opportunity to hear that this afternoon. What was talked about was the IRS and how they want to hire 80,000 plus new agents. First of all, where are you actually going to get 80,000 new agents when every small business in our country is having a problem finding employees? And the reason they can't find employees is because of the idiotic economic policies of Joe Biden. But then at the same time, the Democrats want to weaponize the IRS against every citizen. Every citizen. They want the IRS involved in your banking transactions. This is not only outrageous, it is a violation of every American's due process rights. And you never hear the Democrats talk about this. They ignore it. They want to talk about building back better. Like that's supposed to make everybody feel better when the IRS is snooping in your accounts. They don't talk about energy production, or let me say energy reduction. Because under this bill, which begins to implement the Green New Deal, natural gas production will drop. Coal production will be finished. So where are we actually going to get the electricity for all of the electric cars the Democrats say they want? And the reason why they never talk about the electric cars they want in detail is because this bill provides a $12,000 tax credit to the rich for every electric vehicle that they buy. The reason I say the rich is because poor people don't buy electric cars because they don't have the disposable income to buy electric cars. So these are tax benefits for the rich. But at the same time, this bill cuts energy production in our state. And newsflash for everybody, you need natural gas or coal to produce electricity. That is the way this works. They don't talk about the welfare payments and the fact that we already have enough problem getting people to fill out their shifts and work full time in our economy. When you put in these massive welfare payments, what you're going to do is incentivize people to not work as many hours, which is going to put a massive strain on an already strained economy. Go ask any small business owner in your community. They will tell you they're having a massive problem just hiring people to fill out shifts, which limits the productive capacity of the small business. And it's happening everywhere. I talked about electric vehicles, but the other thing that the Democrats don't like talking about is where you get the batteries from is China. The United States does not mine lithium. The United States does not mine rare earth minerals. China does. And those elements are what gets put into the batteries for electric vehicles. So this bill directly empowers Beijing. I think one of my colleagues says what it does, it builds back Beijing. That's exactly what this does because they're mining these minerals all across the globe. We are not. And the last thing is taxes. We already have an economy that's trying to get back on its feet. And frankly, if it wasn't for Joe Biden, it would have been back on its feet already. But when you raise taxes massively and recklessly, it has repercussions to our entire economy. It will damage big businesses and small businesses. It will hurt the thing that makes all of this possible. You know, in closing, what I'll say is this. For far too long, Washington tries to make the economy mirror its politics. But what Washington needs to do is that our politics needs to mirror our economy. Everything we should be doing up here is to make sure that our economy is thriving, it is robust, so all Americans can succeed. And if all Americans can succeed, those are the best politics anybody could ever ask for. Thanks so much for your time. Thank God. Thank you guys for being here. Anybody have any questions before we close out? Yes, ma'am.
Quickly, on Virginia governor's race tonight, I want to kind of pull it back to a big picture here. As you guys are talking about their Build Back Better plan, do you see, depending on who wins tonight in Virginia, is that going to give, let's say there's a Glenn Youngkin victory, does that improve your message that you just laid out here today? And if McAuliffe wins, do Democrats have wind in their sails to continue pushing forward here?
Well, first thing I'll say is that, look, if Glenn Youngkin is the next governor of Virginia, we should find out hopefully in a few hours. that takes all the wind out of their sails without question. If Terry McAuliffe can't win a state that Joe Biden won by 10 points literally a year ago, what does that tell every moderate Democrat in their conference? What it tells them is, frankly, Joe Biden has no coattails. It also tells them whatever we're doing up here is so unpopular that the people of Virginia, who literally are right across the river, do not like it and do not want it. And what it means more than anything is that the Democrat strongholds of Fairfax County and Loudoun County are saying no. That's a direct